Okay, so I finished the initial phase of the first turn in La Revolution Francaise. First thing that happened was some random. Well, first thing that happens is negotiation. I kind of do that on the fly, playing solo, but actually playing, you would want to hold these negotiations within a segmented period. Then comes a random events phase, and there's 4 events, one for each type. Didn't have a lot happen. A couple of areas, Bordeaux, if I can find it, and somewhere else had they were neutralized, and maybe just Bordeaux. I'm seeing Bray, but that started that way. And that's pretty exciting and everything. Then we pick the game order, and that's done by adding up your fame to the number of areas that you control at that point. And it's a disadvantage to go early, I think, for the most part. Although sometimes there are edges to that. You don't get to choose. Highest person goes first. Then we get to pick objectives. There's one of the random events. The Girondins get +2 to persuading deputies and personalities. And I kind of forgot about that when picking actions or victory point goals. I don't know if I'm going to do it or not. But it can be useful in passing laws as well as converting people. But first, the government, who's planning on suppressing Bourget, which is in revolt somewhere. There it is. And then each of the different factions gets to choose some action they're going to do. Now, I'm playing this a little differently than I normally do. The rules are ambiguous. The examples of the rules include owning territory as one of the things you can choose to do. It's how I've played it for a long time, wondering if I've ever played it the way it's actually written when it comes down to choosing your options, which says you can only choose actions specifically. You can't choose own a territory. That's a big distinction because it's very hard to take a territory from someone if they hold it. They can pretty much fortify it. And at the end of the turn, whether or not you succeed on these affects your current fame. And then I placed people. People where I'm planning on using them by the factions, and where is perhaps expeditious, especially in Paris. That too has to be done in the order of play, which means early players have a chance to grab areas that maybe they get an advantage in, that if they succeed, nobody else will get that same advantage. So that may scare people away from some of those areas. It may not. It's hard to tell. On the other hand, later people are able to play in places that nobody's paying attention to, or to pull off surprise moves, putting a whole bunch of people somewhere and nobody can react. Who cares? Again, different dynamics based on where you're going in the turn. So some actions took place during the first the personality actions. The Girondin convinced Leclos over, and unfortunately he's not back printed, so we get this little smiley face dude. The likeness is astounding. They actually convinced him over to their side and used him in Bordeaux. Part of that was to defend against someone else taking Bordeaux, but it also improved their chances of getting it. We see a number of territories switched hands. The Girondins regained Bordeaux. They also gained a big hunk in the north. See areas like Lille that are empty now. Nimes and Lyon. When we look at the track for who succeeded at what, I think we see why I started to decide that holding areas should be allowable. Basically, we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 different failures that were fairly uncontested, and people spending most of their money. So what that's going to mean is that these renown or fame is going to drop for those factions. This was one of the problems I saw with the game as the rules are written if you don't change that. And there are certainly other areas where there are things that are left out or that don't seem to make complete sense. The example definitely seems to indicate holding the territories enough, but the problem is this is a translation. It's a questionable translation. It could mean plot and hold. It could mean a lot of things. And when you come to where the actual wording for what you're allowed to record down here, it doesn't include holding an area. Anyway, I think that may stilt this game and make it worse than most in terms of just seeing people plummet. Because as your renown goes down, your chances of succeeding at anything go down. And that's going to make, it definitely skews a game that already caused serious problems for the Montagne and the Sans-Culotte. But, at least you get to see the game. And I get to see why I decided on one particular rule's interpretation. So during the political phase, the Filon tried to sway some Marais assembly members onto their side, and they failed. There was a lot of noise already that the Filon were not in good shape, that the Marais were willing to vote against them. But then when it came to trying to cut deals, nobody was willing to pass any laws whatsoever. The only thing that happened was criticism of the government, which is still allowed, and the Filon government fell, and we've got a Girondin government now in place, which gives some slight advantages in this regime. Later on in other regimes, it's much, much stronger. And so that's the end of the first turn, and not a lot happened, and it feels like nothing will ever happen at this point. Now, that may be the case with the reductions we have, with the change in play based on the objective choices, what I'm allowing, what I'm not. But let's look at what happened. First of all the money out of the assignats spent pile gets pulled out, and every $1,000 of that raises the economic value by 1. And we just made it into the second zone, which means everything's going to cost twice as much next turn, unless an event or something drops that, which is unlikely. We saw the Girondins moved the military around to suit their purposes better, setting up down here, and then moving one over to Toulouse. Doesn't really do a lot. Okay, so now the second thing, everybody got their income. Some people made a lot. The Girondins made a lot of money. They actually got an increase. I think everybody else kind of decreased, except for the 2 weakest players who got their chump change. The Royalists, I think, did about the same. They get 350. Basically, you have a minimum that you get of 100 plus 50 per personality that you have on your side. But otherwise, you get what you have in terms of territories. The national government got the full 2,500 that it can produce. The only thing that takes away from that is territories in revolt or conquered by foreign powers. The Royalists got an extra $50. They'll always get extra money off the coalition track from now on. And where else are we? Not quite sure. Oh yeah. So the fame. So everybody went up as they should. That and or down. The Fulan, the government, and the Gironde all went forward, and that'll make them more effective from now on. On the other hand, everyone else stepped back, and that makes them weaker. That means it's going to be tougher for them to keep going and have effective actions. That can also be affected by events, but every time you make an attempt to do something, if you roll a natural 12, and you can make more than one attempt if you have a lot of cash, if you roll a natural 12 on 2 dice, you get a +1. On the other hand, if you get a natural 2 on 2 dice, you get a -1, but that usually is only going to happen if you only made one attempt, because otherwise you could pick a different die roll. Alright, I think that's it, and I'm going to actually seal this one up and load it, because I think there's a lot of information here. I may do less than one turn, or do more turns on one video from now on, but I think this is helpful.